everybody back to Buford Pusser, the other story. With me today is a guest, Jason White. He is a homicide detective from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Very experienced in this thing, and that's the reason I wanted to have him as a guest on the program. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate that.
Oh, you bet. Hey, tell me, I'm curious about this. You've been a homicide detective for some time. How many cases have you worked?
I've been in the homicide. Actually, I started out in crime scene. I've been on the police department for 26 years. I worked the streets as everybody else did. I went on from there. I worked undercover narcotics for a couple of years. And then I went on most notably to crime scene, where I worked a year and a half. So my crime scene experience is not extensive, but I've been a part of a lot of crime scene processing, etc. I've been in the homicide unit, actually the third or I've been in there for 15 and a half years. I've been the lead detective in 115 homicides, and I've assisted on in the neighborhood of 600. Notable, just kind of a fun fact, I've worked the third most homicides in the history of Tulsa. So one day I'll probably be number one, but for right now, I am all-time list number three. There's only three of us that have been the lead on over 100. So probably because it wears you out and it sucks the life out of you. And but I'm still around, so and I plan on being here for several years. So ultimately, I'll be number one.
I was going to say you got a few years left at this, so there is that.
Yeah, yeah,
Of
yeah, yes, sir.
course, we've been talking about Pauline Pusser, her homicide, and of course, uh, the TBI is again investigating this. They've actually completed their investigation and turned their information over to Mark Davidson, the District Attorney General of McNairy County, and it's in his hands. He says he's going to review the case. May take some time, but we expect to hear something before too long. At any rate, what I wanted to have you on here for again is about her homicide. And in this installment, we wanted to look at some of the photographs. And of course, I'll be putting those up on the screen. Uh, but this first one, take a look at it. And it is the one of Terry Abernathy, who was the district attorney general back in 1967 when the homicide occurred. And he there's appears to be blood spatter on the hood. What does that tell you right there?
Well, I think that the account of this particular homicide really, Buford had stated that he had never been outside of the car, and of course, Pauline had not been outside of the car. This is a really interesting. It's a really interesting photo. It's not great. It doesn't show you great detail as to the trajectory necessarily of the blood droplets that are on the hood. And what I'm talking about is you have a with blood stain analysis, which incidentally, I got to say this, Mike, I think it's important to note that really wasn't a discipline back in 1967. Nobody really analyzed blood droplets like they do today. Today, there's textbooks written about it, and it's a science. I mean, it really is. Crime scene people are more so educated when it comes to trajectory and point of origins, etc. So we're looking at this hood, and I think that the account is that neither one of the people got out of the car. That Buford stayed inside of the car during this event, and then you had Pauline, of course, that was killed inside of the car. And when you look at this, you have a single bullet hole that's in the windshield, and I think that based on the report was is that this was a bullet hole that went through the from the inside going out. Okay. And when you look at the hood, you can obviously see there is a tremendous amount of blood spatter, which I would say is you probably have some high velocity here, which is usually 1 millimeter or less, and then you have some medium velocity. So you definitely have an impact spatter of some sort. And that's not coming from inside of that car. There's just no way that that's coming. I'm not saying that all of it's not, but you have there's a couple of slides that really kind of interest me. It's this one, and then there's another one which really shows that front area, that front I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically that line between that front window and the windshield where you'll actually see blood spatter on the metal or on the frame. The frame is what I'm getting at. The frame of that window, and you have blood spatter that's on the outside of that, and there's just no way that you're going to have that necessarily with a bullet going outward through that window. You're just not going to have something like that. So those are two that's interesting to me. What I would make of this is that there's more to the story.
Yep.
That's an easy way to put it. There's more to the story. I don't really want to say one way or the other because I don't know what event happened outside of here, but there's definitely more to this story than what was told.
Yeah, I guess my observation years ago when I saw the photos for the first time was that obviously it doesn't jive with Buford's story that they never got out of the car. Obviously, someone's blood is all over the place, and
Right.
it makes me think that one of them, I'm not sure which, was out of the car. Of course, again, don't have access to the TBI files, so uh, I know that they captured blood types back then, and there were two different types, but I don't know which one was his, which type she was, as opposed to which type he was. So we have no idea whose blood that is, or at least I don't. Uh, but it's interesting that you say that about the way that they look at blood these days, and they didn't really pay much attention to it back in the 60s, especially, I guess, if you were in rural Tennessee. That's not something that you would expect a lot of experienced uh, criminal investigators and people that primarily dealt with homicides.
Yeah,
So,
I will say this. I mean, based on the injury, and I'm gonna give you a hypothetical. I mean, based on the injuries that Pauline sustained, if her blood was on the hood of that car, then it would have been some sort of an event that occurred outside of that car. I mean, it's not going to be from the inside. I just don't see it. You're not going to get that kind of a pattern coming out from within that bullet hole. First, furthermore, if you look at the inside of that window, you would think that you'd have a lot of blood that's coming
right,
out of that hole, and you don't see that on the inside of the window. That's number one. Number two, just by looking at that, I would venture to say that if I had to make a guess and just kind of give you my experience type guess, that's probably going to be Buford's blood. I based on the patterns and stuff, and based on the injury of Pauline, if she sustained her injury on the inside of the car, which it's likely to have happened, uh, unless something happened beforehand, and there could have been something that happened like an assault or some kind of an attack on the outside of the car, where if her blood is out there, then that would be a real possibility. I just think that realistically, based on the evidence that we have here, I think that this is probably going to be more so of Buford's blood on the outside of that car, possibly from the time when if he got shot outside. I know he's saying he didn't, but either she got attacked on the outside and shot on the outside of the car and stuck on the inside of the car, or a lot of it's going to be told based on the evidence of today. I don't know what they collected, and I don't know if you have a property receipt in the stack of stuff that you've been able to obtain. But if they
no,
had a property receipt in reference to this particular case, and they actually swabbed the blood that was on the hood, and I quite frankly I wouldn't know if they did or not. But if they did, then they should be able to go back still to this day and actually do some scientific testing to see if they can get DNA from that. And that would be really interesting to see.
yeah, I became interested in this case and really started looking into it uh, quite some time after Tennessee became a closed state. So, you don't have access to their files. They just don't release it. So what we've got are photographs that were made available prior to that, a little bit of documentation that was prior to that, but the bulk of the files are, hidden away. And I think that was because of a lot of the political process that was going on with a lot of political interference and things like that would be my guess. And so the legislature over there finally just said, Enough's enough. Let's just cut this out." And they ruled that the TBI doesn't have to share their files with anybody. So all we have is bits and pieces. I want you to take a look at the picture of the inside door panel where Deputy Plunk is standing there. Be sure and subscribe and hit that bell so that you'll get notifications of new videos when they're released. And tell me what you see about the blood evidence there.
Well, in this particular slide, and this is a little bit further out, this is what I would call a medium distance photograph. It's kind of a mid distance. How crime scene, let me just kind of educate your listeners. Basically, what a crime scene detective is going to do is they're going to take a picture that is standing back to the point where you can orient yourself to what you're looking at. And then they'll take a mid level that's a little bit closer, and then you're going to get a close up. What the things that stand out to me on this photo, number one, is actually up towards the top of the door. You can see where the rubber is you see there's a bullet hole that's up there on that top frame,
Yeah,
probably about 4 inches to the left. And that's going to be where a bullet strike was, and that's one of the things that stands out to me. I would be interested to see the other side of that door to look to see if it actually penetrated through, and if not, and I don't know if it did or not, because the photos, I just don't know that it shows that in this particular deal, because one of the police officers is kind of covering that area. But what I would like to do in this particular case is I would have liked to have ran a protrusion rod. And what that is, that's basically just a dowel rod you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you kind of stick it in there to see. And it's not going to be exact, but because bullets do funny things. But literally, you can see possibly the trajectory, or you can see the trajectory of where that bullet had came from. Okay, I would want to do that in this particular case. But the other thing that stands out to me here, and I heard Danny Couples talk about it, and I completely agree, and that's the area by the door lock mechanism, right there on the top of that door. And you'll notice that area where you've got a lot of rundown of the blood on that door panel. So you've got a lot of rundown of that blood. We're not talking about blood spatter as far as an impact, or if you shoot. Here's what happens. I'll just kind of try to explain this to your viewers. When when you shoot somebody, and if somebody gets shot, then there's going to be that force that goes into that hole. If it comes out the other end, then you're going to have like a somewhat of a cone pattern that's going to be that blood spatter going that way. You're also going to have a little bit of blowback where that force causes some of the blood to come backwards towards your direction. You'll have sometimes you can't even see it. It's like micro particulates that kind of comes back, known as blowback. You're not going to be able to see that in this photo. You're just not. But what I do see is I see that drip down and that flow of blood, which tells me that she, at some point in time, she's got her head laying up against that door. Now, I know that I've thought about this a lot, Mike, and I've thought about the fact that you talk about the force, or the speeds that they were traveling at. To me, those lines are actually going downward. They're not like in movement, like they're going 60 and 70 or 80 miles an hour down the road, where you're going to have some momentum, and maybe that could affect some of that blood dripping down. It could go a little bit over to the right as it's traveling down the roadway, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm seeing it's more so straight. So to
right.
me, it looks as if that blood flow is likely going to be when the vehicle was stationary, and Pauline's head is going to be up there by the locking mechanism, and you can tell that void. It's almost like a void. There's not any movement there, but yet you do see flows, patterns coming
Around it.
around that. Yeah. So to
Yeah,
me, it
it's
looks like
it's
maybe
more
her head.
visible in the second photograph of the door because that void
Right.
really stands out in it.
Right. So let's look at that one just real quick, and we'll take a peek at that second one. That's more of a close up, and you can see what I'm talking about, where you have that area that does not show the flow pattern, but it's got that blank space. So that's going to be likely where her head came to rest, right there in that vicinity, and it may have even moved around there a little bit, and but for the most part, the blood flow, there's going to be something that is causing that to not have a flow pattern, right? So probably because she has hair. And if we had a close up of this, you'd probably see really fine hair patterns in that area as well, I would guess. I have to preface this with telling everybody on here that's listening to this, in no means do I come across as I'm like a blood. I've taken a lot of blood stain pattern analysis, trust me, but I am not an expert when it comes to that. However, I've got a pretty good idea what I'm looking at. But I'm not the Tom Bevel of the world, who's the guy that's like a godfather of blood stain analysis. But that's what it looks like to me. Okay, it looks to me as consistent with Pauline having her head laying up against that door and having that flow pattern that's going downward. So she's there for a period of time. That's what it looks
Well,
like to me.
let me throw this into the mix. Buford said that as they were going down New Hope Road, they passed the Methodist church there, driven 7/10 of a mile is the distance between the church and the first ambush site. And in that statement, he said that, the car pulled up alongside, turned on its headlights. Now you have to keep in mind that it is 4:45 in the morning. So,
Right.
first of all, it's pretty dark. And a car's chasing him down for 3/4 of a mile, basically, in the dark with no headlights. And I found that a little bit difficult to believe. But then he said when they reached that bridge, that the car pulled up alongside of him, turned on his headlights. That's when he was first aware that it was even there. A couple of shots were fired. One hit Pauline in the head, wounding her because he said she leaned over on him. He couldn't get to his sidearm, and that she was gasping for air, so on. And then he said it was at the second site where she was actually killed by a second shot. Now, in this second photograph, does any of that make sense to you?
Well, I'm going to say that based on I'm not going to say that it's not beyond the realm of possibility 100%. It's difficult to tell, honestly, Mike, because I'm not able to see really what the blood flow is like in the center area. Where was she seated? There's a lot more details I would want to know. Number one, I would ask Sheriff Pusser if I had the opportunity. I'd say, where was she seated? He's talking about her leaning on top of him. Well, okay, that's good. Where is any kind of blood patterns on his clothing that would show that? And the injuries, and so where was the blood in that vicinity, and where inside of the car? Because what you have here, you have like a miniature explosion that's going to happen when you have that bullet impact the skull. You're going to have some sort of a blood effect that's going to occur. Okay, especially, of course, when we're talking about a carbine, right? Is that the weapon that is
Correct.
believed to be used in this?
30 caliber M1.
Yeah, I would think that that would have a pretty good. I'm not a gun expert by any stretch, but I would think that you would have. It's somewhat of like a rifle, isn't it? So you're going to have some sort of I think you're going to have a pretty violent event that occurs here. So I would want to know. I'd like to see her injuries, and I know that that's probably not possible, uh, but I will say that the part where she's leaning up against the door, I'd like to know how that happened.
Oh, that's
How
me.
did that? Yeah, I want to know what happened there, and that's the big question for me.
Well,
And if
when
her
you,
blood is on the hood, well, if and Mike, if her blood is on the hood of that car, or I'm not saying that it couldn't be on the outside at some point, but not to that level. There's a lot of blood on the outside of that hood, and that would be the first thing that I would do. That'd be one of the first things that I would do if I was a cold case detective looking at this. I'd be like, what evidence do we still have? And you hope that it didn't end up in somebody's attic or on a shelf somewhere that once this case gains some notoriety, kind of a deal. But that's what I'd want to know. I really would.
oh yeah, the parts of the story that just really kind of puzzle me is that Buford said that at the second ambush site, he had stopped to check on Pauline. Said he opened the door, he had one foot out on the ground, one foot still inside the car, and he said they were on me again. They pulled up, stopped right beside him, and he said that he got hit by one of the first rounds that were fired. Uh, he fell to the floorboard, which he claimed saved his life. Now, of course, we don't know. It's puzzling. But if
Mhm.
Pauline was leaning up against him and he couldn't get to his sidearm, had he moved her? Did he? It's hard for me to imagine a guy that is 6'6", 250 pounds, uh, would fall over into the floorboard if she was leaning against him. Could be, I don't know. But then he said that she took a second shot. That second shot was the one that killed her. Uh, I just find it all that a little bit hard to understand.
Yeah, me too. It would be really interesting to know where the car is, and that's kind of an interesting thing for me. Where is the car? If the car's been disposed of, and I know that there's been different ideas as to where the car might be. If the car, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, back in 1967, if somebody got killed in a car, I mean, would you want to buy that car and drive in it? I don't know. So it wouldn't
Well,
surprise me a
actually, let
bit.
me say this. Uh, the car was actually put back into service for a little while. It was
Okay.
reconditioned, put back into service, and then it disappeared somehow. We don't know how. Uh,
Yeah, I
some,
didn't know that. So that's interesting.
some people say that it was taken down to Louisiana, sold to an individual down there. Others
Mhm.
say that uh, what that person being that made the statement that Buford had the car buried somewhere around Crump. And the person that said that was another sheriff over in Tishomingo County, a friend of Buford's, uh, James Bishop. And it kind of makes you wonder, well, what would his motivation have been to tell that story? And then you also hear a third story that he had a friend, Rod Province, that had a shop there in Adamsville, and the car was left there for a while after it was taken out of service, and that the engine was removed because it was a powerful engine. Transmission was removed, and then anything that was of value, and then the body was sent down to Selmer Salvage, and it was crushed. And
Yeah,
of
that seems like
course,
the most plausible to me. But then again, because here's the deal. I mean, there's a history of that VIN number, a period. I mean, Ford Motor Company or somebody, the dealer that they bought that from, there's a record somewhere. I know you don't have that VIN number. I wish you did because there's all it is a VIN search. They can't re VIN number cars. That's against the law. So it's still around. They're not going to do it for this car. I will tell you that I think it's fast. I'm not surprised actually, Mike, that car got put back into service, honestly, because we were talking about a small town police department where it's financial. It's a financial situation, and they're not going to just junk a car because of something like this, maybe. You look at the President Kennedy's car. A lot of your viewers may not know this, but that car was actually used by several other presidents past Kennedy. So up until Ford, I think, or even Carter. So the same Lincoln Continental convertible that was used for many presidents. But my point is, if somebody knew where that car was, it would be kind of cool to get it because if you could get it, what could we do with it today? Well,
okay, folks, let me say this. If you're out there and you're watching this and you have any
yes,
idea about that car, well,
yes,
let somebody know. Get a hold of the TBI and tell them what you know. But
or call Mike
that's
or
the reason
message
that they
Mike.
reopened a lot of this right now into Pauline was they got to looking at a lot of things that we've discussed on my Facebook page, so on. Uh, People were offering information and they re-engaged. They got involved again. And like Jason has said, there's a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort that's been put into this. So
Yeah.
here I've got to really admire what they uh, have tried to do to finally bring this case to a resolution.
And I'll tell you what, Mike, if what would be one of the reluctance of somebody not turning that car over? All right. Well, that car theoretically now the historical value of that car I think it'd be valuable. I really do. I think that people would want that car. Uh, but even then, I think what could we do with that car today? I don't know what all technology exists to the level, but I think that you would start off with maybe X-raying that car and seeing because you could check where the bondo is and you could see and maybe even they could probably dissect that a little bit. And believe it or not, there'd probably even still be some evidence in that car,
Oh yeah.
potentially bullet fragments and stuff, even all these years later, believe it or not. You never know what you might find. And I think it'd be fascinating to actually take a look at it. I really do. I know that you went to great lengths to use a car that was of the same model and everything else, and that's a rare car. Plymouth Fury of that year. Didn't you say how many did they make of that specific
I don't
model?
know
It's
the
really
exact number, but of that particular model, it wasn't
yeah.
many.
So if you're somebody in Louisiana and you're listening to this and you got that car sitting in a garage somewhere, that would be a really interesting situation. And I'm sure that the TBI would get the car back to you. It's not like you're going to lose that car. I think that some people might kind of be like, "Oh my God, I don't want to lose my car or lose this classic car to this agency." That wouldn't be the case in that particular situation. They would want to look at it, though. I can promise you.
I might also add, if you happen to have a metal detector, you happen to be around Crump and get a good reading and have any idea where the car is, same thing applies.
Yeah. I'll tell you
Hey,
what. I'll volunteer. Mike and I will volunteer to come out there and we'll you can take us to the site of where the car is buried. I think that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? That'd
oh,
be
you're darn
something.
If
right.
you want to learn the real story of Buford Pusser, you need to get my book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. It is full of facts and information that you don't get anywhere else that I know of. It's the story as told by the people who live their own parts in the real tale. It's full of photographs, documents, lots of interesting things to see, and it pretty well outlines everything from Buford's birth up until the time of his death. And even after that, because the family became embroiled in a lot of lawsuits over his legacy. So, again, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, it's available at both Amazon.com and eBay.
Yeah.
Hey, another one I wanted you to look at real quick. We've got about 8 minutes left. Uh, Take a look at the photograph of the shoes sitting in the car because Diane,
Right.
if you'll recall in the last episode, talked about Buford coming back, picking up the shoes that had fallen off of Pauline's feet and placing them in the car. To me, that does not look like the way that a woman would kick off her shoes on a casual ride.
Well, I'm looking at it, and I don't really know. I don't know.
Yeah, to me, it
I,
just looks like that. It's kind of like she said that they were placed there, not like that Pauline had taken them off. It's hard to.
I, it's hard to say. You know what would be interesting to me, Mike, it is if there was more photos involved in this case that you don't even know about. I
I'm sure
they
there
only
are.
you'll there only is there's a handful of these photos. You never know. You never
Yeah,
know the training of the people from back in the day. Nowadays I like to see like 200 and 300, if not more, photos. It just depends upon the police officers and their training, and like I said, you may only have what you see. That may only be what exists. I wish they were better. I think that you're looking at probably copies of copies of copies. I would like to look at the footwear just to see if there was any. To tell you the truth, I'd like to look at the shoes. If the shoes still existed, I'd like to see the soles of the shoes, to be honest with you,
oh
because
yeah,
underneath the soles, because that would tell a lot. It would tell you, number one, as they're sitting right there in that floorboard, you shouldn't have any blood on the soles of that shoe as they sit there right there, if you would agree with that.
correct.
Now, if you did have blood on the soles of those shoes, that means that Pauline was outside of that car and stepped in blood. And so therefore there would be a lot of unanswered questions as to why that is.
Hey,
But I would hope that those shoes still exist in a property room somewhere, but you never know.
yeah, a couple of things more. Uh, Very, very briefly, I've got a photo I'm putting up here, shows two boys standing outside a car. It doesn't really tell you much. You can see two holes in the doorpost right by the one's head. The second photo is a close-up of the two bullet holes, which were allegedly two separate shots. And I've often wondered if Buford was trying to set this thing up to make it look like that he was the intended victim, if they actually fired into that doorpost to make it look like they were trying to get him in the head. I mean, we're having to surmise there.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of, I got to tell you, the one thing that, I mean, I know we got to be brief here, but one of the things that kind of sticks out to me that is kind of one of the things that just kind of makes me scratch my head here. And I'm not saying that this is what happened, but you talked about a situation where this gun exchange and Dennis Hathcock actually wrote down the tag number. I would have liked to have known what that led them to and what kind of investigative efforts took place to go track those people down and talk to
Well,
them
I
and
can
interview
tell
them,
you,
etc.
I can give you a little bit of an answer there. They gave the tag number when they heard about Pauline to
Right,
Johnny's dad. And
right.
he said that he would take it down to uh, Jim Moffett, the chief deputy,
Okay.
but we have no idea at that point if he did,
Yeah.
if anything was done with it. It's
Yeah.
just a
And
mystery.
that and that's one of those things that you kind of wish that you could still you wish that you could get some more information about that. That's interesting to me. As far as I don't know. There's a lot of crazy questions here. You can scrutinize any case. I can promise you that. I've seen a lot of things that some things aren't always what they appear. Uh, it may not be anything. Well, what I was getting at is the point of this gun exchange. The thing that really steps out to me is that one of the reports is that he had grabbed onto the barrel of that gun, and
Right.
I've heard people talk about that. There's just no way because of the heat of the end of that barrel. Well, we're talking about a traumatic situation. Is it possible? But the thing that always kind of made me kind of think, based on the things that I've learned from your podcast, is that, uh, well, it would explain his fingerprints or his handprints being on the gun in the
Correct.
event that that gun got found. And
Right.
so that's the thing that I kind of think about.
Hey,
It's going to be really exciting.
we're in the last seconds here, so let me just say, appreciate you being on here. Hopefully, for those of you attending our meet and greet on May 24th in Selmer and taking the tour of all these sites with us, uh, hopefully Jason is going to be there and joining us for that.
I'm going to try. I've got my book, Mike. I've
Oh,
got the basically the encyclopedia of information in reference to this case, which you've exhaustively researched. And so I appreciate that. And this is something that I've already started going through. There's a wealth of information in here, and I appreciate you having me on. I would encourage your guests that to keep watching his podcast. They're really good. I endorse it. I think it's great. I think what you're doing is fabulous, and I wouldn't want you investigating me, Mike. I'll tell you that. My gosh.
well, let
And
me
then the other
say,
thing.
let me just say before we run out of time, uh, Jason is has a podcast, Into the Fire. He talks about homicide
Okay.
investigations. He's also uh, you'll see him on A&E's First 48 a lot. So you
Yeah.
need to catch his podcast and watch First 48 when you see a
Yep.
Tulsa
You
incident.
can catch it on Detective Jason White on my YouTube page, Detective Jason White. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter or X. You can find me in all those places. I'm easy to find. I'm approachable and I actually respond back. So I would love to have you join me. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor. It really is.
Oh,
I'm
honor
glad to
having
I'm
you
glad
here.
to I'm glad to call you a friend. I really am glad to have met you, and I think you're just an amazing person and you're doing a great thing here. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, folks, like I always say, until next time, just remember truth has no agenda. Thanks for watching.